Welcome to Venezuela Insider, the only place in Venezuela for expats, digital nomads, entrepreneurs, investors, travelers, and related internationals. For more information, please visit venezuelainsider.com. Today, we are talking about the challenges that Venezuela faces for the 2023 year. And when I say that Venezuela faces some challenges, I'm talking about the average Venezuelan and also the private enterprises that operate here in Venezuela. So let's start. Number one is the cost of living for the average Venezuelan. The cost of living here in Venezuela it's not cheap for the average Venezuelan since the country is being de facto dollarized. And it happens, and we have to go back to 2018 at that moment. That back then, I will say, kind of started the economic growth again here in Venezuela after an 80% GDP collapse. So what happened back then is that the average Venezuelan, well, many people, they earn pretty much nothing. The average salary, let's say the minimum wage was around $2, $3, $10, and some salaries were $20, $50 per month, and it was pretty awful back then, of course. However, back then also the cost of living was quite cheap. With $50 to $100, basically you can cover your whole expenses for the month. However, today, 2022 and 2023 is not the case. What happened is, since of course the salaries, the wages were pretty low, the cost of labor has been increasing. Right now, the average Venezuelan earns around $200, $300 per month. Still, they can make ends meet. The average basket of goods and service has been increasing, and the cost of living is quite high for the average Venezuelan. We're talking about a few $100s to even some cases several $100s, and the products and services here in Venezuela are expensive for them. What happened is also that, and of course, the prices have been rising. And I'm talking on real terms, on US dollar terms, had been increasing year by year since then, since 2018. And of course, the average Venezuelan are struggling to keep up with such prices. And the wages, although has been rising steadily since 2018, however, they don't keep up with inflation. And we are talking about, again, on USD inflation. And of course, we know that around the world, we are suffering worldwide inflation on euros, on USDs, on Canadian dollars, on Australian dollars, on pesos, you name it. And we know the reasons. The central banks printed money during COVID. However, in Venezuela is for another complex set of reasons, and of course that also affects the Venezuelan prices. However, here in Venezuela we still have a lot of frictions. Remember, we still have a bunch of problems that we have to solve, and such frictions on the Venezuelan economy are translated to the final prices of goods and services. So for one hand, the average Venezuelan is struggling to keep up with such price rises for the basic basket of goods and services. However, also private companies here in Venezuela are struggling as well, since their prices are increasing as well, and they're not able to pass to the final consumer such price increases. They try, however, what they end up happening is that the average Venezuelan, they can keep up with such prices, and they're losing and reducing their market share in favor of international companies, imported goods and services. And right now, with the opening of the border with Colombia, now they have to compete with Colombian goods and services that usually are cheap and also good quality. You have a great ROI with the Colombian goods and services. So that summarizes a great conundrum that if private companies either have to become more competitive, offer great prices and great quality of goods and services, is the only way that they can keep up with such situation. Number 2 is credit and financing. Here in Venezuela, the banking credit is virtually not existent. In Venezuela, the banking lending is around 1% of GDP, so that's preposterous, that's pretty low, that's terribly low. And if you compare it with other economies in Latin America, the banking credit represents between 30% and 70% of their GDP. Here in Venezuela, it's just 1 to 2%, and it is due mostly because the government agency that regulates banks is called SUDEBAN, or Superintendencia Bancaria. They have a high fractional reserve banking requirement. So they require banks to hold the deposits of around 70% of the deposits. Right now it's around 70%. And of course, the Venezuelan banks, they cannot issue lending, they cannot issue mortgages of credits. And so that's one of the main problems that has a stranglehold on the Venezuelan economy in order to keep growing on the next few years. And number 3 is Colombian competition. Remember, a few months ago, President Petro took office on Colombia, and he's a left-wing leaning politician, and he reestablished diplomatic relationships with Venezuela, especially with Nicolás Maduro. And right now we have good economic relations with Colombia. So new airlines have been approved to fly from Bogota to Caracas and such. And the borders between Colombia and Venezuela have been reopened, and that brings the opportunity to Colombian companies to sell their goods and services here in Venezuela. And you have to remember that Colombian goods and services are very good quality, and they are affordable. They have reasonably good prices. The thing is that the Venezuelan private companies now have to compete with Colombian companies, which for me it's a great news for basically most Venezuelans, because right now they have access to cheaper goods and services. However, by the other hand, the Venezuelan companies, private companies, have to be more competitive because they have to compete with Colombian goods and services, and for do so, they are not accustomed for such competition, and they have to do things better, and if they don't, they risk, or they are on the brink of bankruptcy, or even just losing market share in favor of these Colombian companies. So for one hand, it's a good news for the consumer, but for the other hand, it's not such good news for the average private Venezuelan enterprise, because they have to be more competitive. And sincerely, some of these companies that are operating right now in Venezuela, they don't have the capacity in order to compete with their Colombian counterparts. Thank you for watching Venezuela Insider. Please follow us on other social media. If you want to work with us, venezuelainsider.com. Thanks again. Have a nice day. Happy New Year 2023.